Founders Forum, episode 28.
Open your mind to a new episode of the Founders Forum, the podcast championing a free economy, sound assets, and blockchain solutions. Each week, your hosts, entrepreneur Cole Snell and economist Bob Murphy, interview pioneers and free thinkers to help you develop into the architect of your future.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Founders Forum. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Scott Allen. Let me read a little bit from his official bio here, and then I'll tell you more about what this episode has in store. So Scott Allen, PhD, is the Robert M. Ginn Institute Professor for Leadership and Social Responsibility at John Carroll University. He's a professor of management and teaches courses in leadership, the future of work, and executive communication. Now, besides some of his official accolades here that I'm going to skip in the interest of brevity, Scott is the host of a popular podcast called Phronesis, which focuses on bringing in guests who discuss leadership skills, team building, and such. And he also helped develop an AI tool that would give his students immediate feedback on their verbal presentations. So we're going to touch on all of these issues in this episode, which is arguably the most appropriate Founders Forum episode of all time, because this really is just talking with someone who's going to explain the toolkit and diagnostic criteria and so forth that you can use if you're either literally running a business or if you're just a manager within a business and you have people who report to you, that this really does. We get specific. It's not just speaking in vague generalities. We get down to some news you can use in this episode, and you'll just learn the tools for how you can operate in an environment like that to improve your own leadership skills. And we cover a lot of other stuff along the way. It's a very pleasant interview. I had a lot of fun talking with Scott. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Scott, welcome to the Founders Forum.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. So you wear several hats, but I think we should first focus on your academic track. So you're a doctor, a PhD. And so if the plane's ever going down and they say, is there a doctor in the house? You can say yes. So can you explain what exactly your degree is in and then what it is that you teach?
Yeah, sure. So actually, my wife says he's a doctor, but not the good kind. That's
right?
How you
Yeah. I didn't know if we had the rapport yet where I could go there. I was tiptoeing up to it.
So my PhD is in leadership and change, and I've always had this just incredible jet fuel for the topic of how we better prepare people to serve in these really, really at times gnarly roles where we're trying to not only move the work forward, but create an environment that is facilitating engagement, that's motivating. It's just Herculean in some cases. And so I'm fascinated by the people who do that work, but I'm also really fascinated by the puzzle of how do we better prepare people to succeed when doing that work? And so I love the conversation. I have my own podcast and I talk with people all over the world every week, and we explore all kinds of nooks and crannies of the topic of leadership and leader development. So yeah, the PhD is in leadership and change, and I've been at John Carroll University, which is in Cleveland, Ohio, a Jesuit institution, since 2006. So I teach courses in our MBA and love it. I absolutely love talking about the topic, writing about the topic, speaking on the topic, engaging with others on the topic of leadership and leader development. Yeah.
Okay, so just to be clear, is it, I imagine, and this is the case, but I just want to make sure I'm not assuming, it's not that, MBA students who want to head companies are the only ones to take your class, is the kind of thing that everybody needs to know how to develop their inner leadership skills?
Yes, so it's a core course in the context of our MBA. And yes, I mean, that's part of the philosophy is if you're going to take on a position of authority, if you're going to be a leader or a manager in an organization, can you build a high-functioning team? Can you motivate that team? Can you set the priorities? Can you engage in difficult conversations, performance management? What leadership style are you going to choose to use in this moment? What's the appropriate style to use? How do you navigate stress, manage your time? I mean, all those different parts of the conversation that we want from great leaders, that's what I talk about. And then in my consulting work, that's what I talk about in organizations as well.
Okay, so leadership style, can you, I don't want you to give away the secret sauce here, but
No.
if it's your, okay. If you're, I mean, I actually do, I do want you to give away the secret sauce. I just meant, I don't want you to feel like you're put on the spot.
Yeah.
Like you say, I will have to send you an invoice after. So I don't know if there's a lot of them or but can you explain that what is, and then does it mean each person has to think, gee, I kind of want to be like Optimus Prime when I grow up? Or is it that in each situation, like, oh, when there's a fight on the plant floor, you got to show up this way. But if some guy's going through a divorce and he's not, his work's suffering, you got to show up this way. Can you just speak to those?
Yes. Yeah. So it's a fun conversation for sure. So leadership styles. I mean, what's really, really cool about this literature is that you can kind of go to some of the parenting literature, and there's different parenting styles. And there was a great article written by a guy named Dan Goleman, and it was a Harvard Business Review article a few years back now, and it was called Leadership That Gets Results. And he talks about 6 different styles or approaches to getting the work done, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's more than these, but I'm going to just highlight a couple of them for you. But he uses this really, really great analogy or metaphor in the paper of these are like golf clubs. These are tools, and each one of these tools has an appropriate time and place. But we don't tee off with the putter, we don't putt with the driver, and the 3-wood probably won't be the best tool to get us out of the sand. So he then highlights these different styles. And this was actually based on some work that was done earlier than him by some other scholars. But you can have a democratic style, which is kind of you listen and engage the team. What do you all think? What do you think we should do? You can have more of an authoritative style, which is not authoritarian, but authoritative. Like, here's where I think we need to go. You have a vision. You think you know. You think you know the path forward. Can have more of a coercive style. This is kind of like a yell, tell, hard sell, like do it now. I don't care what you think. More of like a teach and coach style, which is I'm going to slow down, try and really build your capacity, educate you on how this is done well, and then we're going to move forward. So there's these different clubs, and what we find oftentimes in organizational life is that leaders have 1 or 2 of these, and they're their default styles. And the tragedy is when they're trying to play the course, par 5, with literally a driver and a sand wedge. And for certain parts of the course, great, that'll be a tool that will help you. But for other parts of the course, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. And so I think the conversation when it comes to leadership styles is, are you intentionally choosing a club for where you are on the course? Some of the time, I need to look at the team and say, what do you think? But each one of these styles has a time and a place, benefits and drawbacks. Sometimes that approach takes a long time. Sometimes you've been in organizations, Bob, where someone said, what do you think? But you really knew that they didn't care. They weren't really going to do. It was theater, right? So if you're not authentic with that, you actually damage the culture and kind of diminish trust. So each one of them have a time and a place. Each one of them at times have benefits and drawbacks. There's a couple that one is a pace-setting style, kind of an energize and push.
Can I interrupt you for a second just to tell a quick anecdote? You just reminded me. Maybe I had suppressed the memory.
PTSD.
But you just triggered something. When I was in undergrad, I was they called it a student manager at the cafeteria.
Yeah.
So it was like like in the concentration camps when some people got promoted above the other ones, and then there was the lady that was like the actual employee of the college, or you know what I mean, like the adult who ran the thing and who hired us and stuff. And so we would have weekly meetings or whatever, and we had to. Now there were 2 candidates to like become part of our club of the student managers, and we had interviewed them all and blah blah blah. And so then the lady, like, she gave us, she passed out a survey to us, and there were like different criteria, like whatever it was, competence, reliability, whatever, in terms of evaluating does this person have what it takes. And so we all ranked the 2 applicants. And then she took them in and she looked at it and she goes, okay, yes. Well, I agree with you guys. Think you made the right choice that we're going to promote Jim. And we had actually all voted for Mary. And she just mistabulated. And we went, no. We voted for Mary. And she went, oh, okay, well, we're going to hire Jim. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was clear that this was all a big farce, and you knew who you were hiring, and why'd you even go through this exercise?
Yes. And, she might as well have just hired Jim and told the group authoritatively, we're going to go with Jim. And
and then it would have been fine. It was okay. You're the adult. I'm only, 19. What do I know?
But don't put me through this theatrical experience of, I have some voice in this, right? So it's about leaders being aware of the clubs, leaders intentionally choosing a club like you would on the course, or you could also use a spice metaphor, right? You can over pepper a dish, you can under pepper a dish. Some dishes don't require pepper. A par 3 doesn't need a whole bunch of those clubs, ideally. So generally speaking, depending on the context, depending where we are, what style am I choosing to use to move the work forward? And unfortunately, a lot of times we see people use styles that literally kill the energy, kill the enthusiasm, kill culture. And leaders at that point are kind of flying blind. They shut themselves off from the perspectives of others. They shut themselves off from the trust and engagement. And if you look at what some of the Gallup numbers suggest, 70% of how I experience the organization is my direct supervisor. And if they're not skilled at doing that work well, then we're in trouble. And oftentimes in organizations, the phlebotomist who was promoted is given very few resources as they become the nurse manager to really succeed as a leader, which is a totally different job than drawing blood at this point, right?
I actually knew that's what a phlebotomist was. Yeah.
They might be drawing blood in a different way. They might be
right. Yeah.
sucking energy from culture. But I love that puzzle, right? So that's like one nook and cranny of the conversation around, well, what does it mean to be an effective leader? How do we actively engage in this work so that we're providing an environment that is, obviously there's accountability, there's standards, there's principles that we're upholding, and we're creating an environment where people are engaged, they're excited, they're enthusiastic. And that's a 3-dimensional puzzle. You're playing 3-dimensional chess, right? You got to be really good to do that well.
So just to push that golf metaphor a little bit further, does it even go to the level of, so certainly every pro shows up to the course with a full bag of clubs. It's not like they're just like, no, I just always, I just need 3 clubs. That everybody shows up with totally, but I can, not that I know too much about golf, but I'm pretty sure 2 players, if their drives land in identical spots, they might each hit a different club from that spot because one of them's got more distance or whatever. One's like, oh no, I can really land, I can hit it over the water and land it, whereas the other one says, no, that's too risky for me. I'm going to, whatever.
Yeah.
So is the same thing, does that carry over too? That even though each leader or manager needs the ability to rely on different styles for the same, or different managers in the same situation, sometimes one of them, it's like, no, you're just, for you, go in there, just lay down the law, but for you, go in there and make everyone feel like their voice has been heard or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, every time it's a little bit of a gamble. And each one of us have our own personalities, our own strengths, our areas of strength and our areas of drawbacks, our limitations, our weaknesses, we could call them. So there might be leaders who are less comfortable using some of these clubs. So for instance, if you have a leader who avoids conflict like the plague, well, you've probably worked in that organization where the leader avoided conflict. And again, that's kind of their default setting when it comes to conflict. And they struggle with that kind of more coercive tell style of leadership. That's going to be damaging at times. And so when they have to be more coercive, they might not play that club all that well. And it might be like, I'm trying to use a 5-iron and I've never really practiced it and it's clumsy. Right. It's just not skilled. So yeah, I mean, I think different leaders are going to rely on some of these clubs. But again, are you skilled in 7 or 8 of them? And when you're playing the game, can you pull out the right tool for where you are in the course? If you can't, you're potentially limited in certain situations. You just are. And you can take that conversation to a whole bunch of other places too. A lot of these golfers have caddies, and oftentimes they're using the caddy to provide them with some feedback, right? And if the caddy is not someone who feels like they can provide the golfer with feedback or their expertise, well, that golfer is shutting themselves off from that data and at least that information to consider, right?
Happens. Yeah, that was something I didn't. I didn't realize that when I was little. I thought the caddy literally was just the guy carrying the clubs around. Then later, I was actually caddy. Yeah. Oh, you were? Okay. Yeah.
I was, and I had just carried the clubs around. I was in 6th grade.
Okay.
And I, put the bag on my shoulders and went, right?
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like in the classroom setting, do you do role playing or is it just reading the textbook and here's a case study or all the above?
Can I geek out on you for a moment?
That's what this podcast is for.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So there's this really, really cool kind of branch of the literature. It's the adult learning theory base of literature. And so there's this really, really wonderful resource that I came across where these authors, in a very, very beautiful way, kind of highlight 5 orientations of learning. Okay. So, do you have the knowledge? Do you have the skill? Do you have the experience? Do you have the mentors or the coaches? And do you have the self-awareness to do this work? A lot of times when we're trying to develop leaders, it's people sitting in a room talking about it. So that's just that cognitive dimension of the whole conversation. That's that you might know a lot about football, but if I sit in a room and just learn about football for a semester, that doesn't mean I have a football player at the end of it. I have someone who knows about football or soccer or whatever surgery, right? I don't have a surgeon or a pilot at the end of that strictly cognitive experience. So when we're developing leaders, when we're engaging in the classroom and the MBA courses, we're trying to hit all 5 of those dimensions. We're trying to build the knowledge. We're also trying to build skill. So can we place these students in a little bit of a simulator where we're not going to replicate organizational life, but can we simulate some of the situations that they're going to find themselves in and truly build some skill? I take on more of a coaching role, especially when we are in some of these experiential activities, so that they can build their own awareness and become more kind of in tune with, well, gosh, I was really stressed out and I lost my emotional intelligence. Yes, right? And so can we build that self-awareness? And then providing the students with experiences. So I will use very real events and activities to provide the students with an experience where they're living the concepts we've discussed. So we're trying to, again, if I want to create a world-class surgeon or pilot, they have the knowledge, they have the skill. I want the person who's done it 100,000 times, the surgery. I want the person who's had the best mentors in the world. And I want that person who has the self-awareness about their own strengths and weaknesses as they kind of walk through the world. So that's how we approach the work. The challenge with leader development is most of it is done like that phlebotomist. Someone's just put in the role and they learn whatever it is they learn, good, bad, and ugly. Or they're sitting in a room talking about it. And no amount of talking about being an astronaut is going to make you an astronaut. You need some of those other dimensions, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It has to be multidimensional, that learning, regardless of the context. But a lot of times with entrepreneurship even, right? Sitting in a room talking about entrepreneurship, you don't have an entrepreneur. You know that. You have one dimension of the learning, but by no means are you an entrepreneur yet.
Actually, there's a school of thought that says you can't teach entrepreneurship per se. Like you can teach managerial skills and stuff, but if entrepreneurship is like, how do you seize opportunities that nobody else sees? It's kind of hard to teach that per se.
Yeah, it's just one dimension of the learning, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some concepts from entrepreneurship that would be really beneficial for me to know. But again, until I've actually engaged in the work, started a company, understood and lived some of these things, talked with mentors and guides throughout that process and lived it and really tried to build some skill, like giving a pitch. I might be able to do a little skill building in an entrepreneurship major where you're going to learn how to make a pitch and actually build that skill. But yes, I mean, nothing can replace the activity of actually engaging in that work, right?
So there you were focusing on like in a classroom setting, but you also do coaching, or I don't know if consulting is the term you use, with actual entrepreneurs who are out there on the field. How does that work? Is it all over the place, or is it a kind of structured, like they come and tell you their problems and then you help them work through them?
I have a couch. No.
Now, tell me about your suppliers. Oh, okay, yes. And you're just writing down notes, and is that bad?
Yes. So Series A, yes. So, it varies. It varies a lot. And so at times it's coaching leaders. So I literally was on a coaching call last week with a leader who's been moved into an elevated role that is kind of kicking his butt. And so the conversation was all around time management. So we had this conversation about time management. I gave him a little bit of homework, said, let's try this out for a couple of weeks, and then we're going to check in and talk again and see how that worked. What did those experiments yield, right? We can maybe get to this, but I think about leadership similar to entrepreneurship in some ways. You're running a lot of experiments. Or it might be that I'm in an organization. 2 days ago, I was in New York City working with an architecture firm, and it was workshops and really engaging in dialogue and conversation with some of these really, really insanely talented architects and designers who are now in charge of getting work done through other architects and designers. How do we provide them with the skills now to do that work? We know they're great architects, but getting work done through others is a totally new job. And so that was really a lot of conversation, dialogue, 3-hour sessions around things like advanced problem solving, things like emotional intelligence, leadership styles, followership styles. So the organizational work, it really varies, but oftentimes it's kind of landing on workshops and awareness building among the participants. And I really think about this space as having certain mindsets. Do you have some certain mindsets that help you kind of tackle any situation when you're leading others? Because the challenge of this is that there's an infinite number of variables and we can't account for all of them. So can we create a mindset or mindsets that help the leader navigate these different things that they encounter, right?
Well, you keep coming back to that theme of with the phlebotomist example. I just like to say that word. I don't say it very often. It doesn't come up often.
Phlebotomist. Yes, it's a very fun word.
That and molybdenum is another personal favorite. Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to be able to work that one in. But the idea of like, oh, just because you have a really good skill at something and you get promoted, but that doesn't mean you have managerial talents. And what I'm reminded of is, as you know, since you went to grad school, how K through, 12, you need a teaching, certificate or degree. Like to be able to teach little kids, you have to take a course in how do you teach.
Yes.
Whereas at undergrad and certainly at the graduate level, no, it's, if you're published in this area, then go ahead and teach others. And some of those people are just horrendous communicators of information.
Yes. I mean, admittedly, yes. And I sat through those courses where I thought I loved political science, but then Mr. Green walks through the door and you suck the energy. Dr. Green sucked the energy out of every soul in that room, right?
Right.
And so you're right. I mean, it's a challenge. Just because I've published in these 3 journals, these academic journals, does not mean that I'm an incredible educator and transferring that knowledge to others. So that's a very real phenomenon. And in some cases, those individuals just want to do research. They aren't interested in teaching.
What it sort of shocked my fragile little mind when I first went to grad school. I was a first year, and we were in an elevator, and there was 2 professors chit-chatting, and these guys, one of them was humongous in the field. Like the other one, I think they actually both were. I'm trying to remember who the other guy was, but I think they were both pretty big names.
Were you the one guy, Friedman?
No,
you're an economist, right?
Yeah. No, I was not at that school. I applied, and now the truth comes out, letting people know. NYU was my safety school. So they were chit-chatting, and the guy, he said something like, "Are you teaching this semester?" And he was like, "Yeah." And it was clear, like, I can't do what I want to. I got to teach these kids. You know what I mean? And I was just like, in front of me, it was kind of, they shouldn't have been saying it with me standing right there. I mean, now that I'm telling you the story. But in any event, I was shocked at the time because I thought, like, you went into this and into academia because you just want to be smoking your pipe and going and coming with your tweed jacket and pontificating like Robin Williams or something. And no, that's not what they were doing.
Well, I imagine you see this in some ways with entrepreneurs as well. I mean, you have someone who's fascinated by an idea, fascinated by building something around a product or around a process, and I don't know that their energy necessarily, some it is, but is their energy around building high-functioning teams, leading others, navigating people and humans. And so it's an interesting space because I think sometimes we get into some of these things and, the attorney all of a sudden learns that now they're trying to build a book of business. And they didn't get into it for sales, but that's a very, very real part of the work, right? Or the accountant trying to become partner. You better be great at building relationships and business development if you want to become partner, right? So, I mean,
I know like certain big like tech school, like to get big grants for the super collider or what making stuff up, a telescope or whatever. That your ability to go raise money is a big part of when you may have just thought, no, I want to be the next Richard Feynman or something.
You're chasing grants, right?
Yep.
That's a huge piece of the work as well for faculty at some institutions, specifically R1s. You're required in some cases to get tenure. You're publishing, you're getting grants, and that may or may not be why they got into it, right?
Right. Yep. You alluded to it a minute ago, but I did want to come back and focus on for a bit. The podcast did you launch the podcast or you took it over from someone?
I did. So it was March 2020. I had a little bit of time on my hands, a little nervous energy going on, and I needed a project. And so I started watching videos on YouTube like anyone would as they're kind of starting something up at times. And I came across this resource called Buzzsprout, and they had these tutorials on how to start a podcast. And yeah, I have absolutely found it fascinating. I love it. I absolutely love it. Every week I release an episode. I'm probably on about 195 that have been recorded. And as you know, you're building relationships, you're networking, you are improving your communication skills. I'm learning. And as I'm talking with some of these folks who are the best at what they think about and what they do in the world, both scholars and practitioners, it's been a blast. I mean, I've absolutely loved it. And again, for me, it's like systematized my learning in a really, really nice way. I don't know if you found that to be the case, but I'm constantly learning from other individuals and their experiences and their expertise. It's been a blast.
Yeah, that has been the case. And those are the most fun episodes. Like obviously I do some prep work and I jot some things down just in case.
Yes.
We get 12 minutes in and the guy's just staring at me and give me one word, and I can, but, and I could tell with this one that wasn't going to happen right off the bat. It's like, oh no, this guy likes to laugh. This will be fine. But yeah, with the ones where I'm literally learning things and it's like a real conversation. There happens to be a camera and a mic going. It's not that we're putting on a show. Like that's the best, best flow.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun. And again, just there's things that people will say in just really, really beautiful ways. Like I was talking with this gentleman from the Air Force Academy. He is in charge of a journal that the Air Force Academy has called the Journal of Character and Leadership Development. His name's Doug Lindsay. And he kind of came up with this quote that he shared with me by a guy named Bob Hogan. But the quote was, it's just become this favorite quote of mine, like, who you are is how you lead. And so he said that, and it was kind of the snapshot quote, who you are is how you lead. And I mean, my mind has thought about that quote a lot. And I use that in a lot of my workshops as well. And that will keep people talking. That quote can keep people talking for a half hour or longer if I let it go. And so people just come up with these phrases and these statements that just live in my mind and help in a beautiful way just kind of encapsulate concepts. And I love it. It's been, as you know, it's a lot of work, but it's also been a lot of fun.
Well, yeah. So what was it? Who you are is how you lead. Is that it?
Yeah.
Did I have
who you are
it?
is how you lead. Yeah.
Yeah. See, that kind of goes back to what I was trying to put my finger on. I don't know if I articulated it well. That because I have seen different stuff with different types of bosses, or just in an academic setting, like boss isn't really the right word.
Yeah.
But leaders, just broadly defined, and that different styles and with certain people. Like some people, they don't. It's more like, if you disappointed them, then you really feel bad.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like they don't even have to say anything. It's just, you can just tell, because the person, like they're so good at what they do and you so much want them to think that you're good at it too. You know what I mean? Whereas other people just scream all the time. And so and that may be effective in some cases, but it's like the other person, if they screamed at you, you'd drop out of the field. So like that wouldn't be appropriate. Where it'd be if they built up that sort of level of respect and awe that everyone just, oh my goodness, like he sort of looked away when I asked a question, and that it's going to devastate me. So anyway, that's what I meant. That certain people, they have different styles, are more appropriate in general.
Yeah, and that who you are is how you lead. I mean, again, this is where this conversation can go. I mean, it's your personality. It's how you navigate stress, your level of optimism, your grit and resilience in the face of adversity. Because if you're in a lead, there's a lot of adversity. There's a lot of momentum working against you. It's your values and your level of integrity to those values and morals and principles. It's your lived experience and your life experience. It's your knowledge. I mean, so there's a whole world. And then what I love about that quote is I think you can kind of, who you are is how you parent, right? Mm-hmm. For some of us, we won the lottery and others maybe not. Or who you are is how you coach or teach or partner.
Mhm.
So for me, then the master kind of lesson when it comes to leadership, if others are in your care, are you constantly becoming the best version of yourself? Are you building a system where your learning and development is happening always so that you're that person you just spoke of, that
Mhm.
person who you wouldn't want to disappoint, that person who you do find motivating, that person who you do in your heart believe they care about your growth and development?
Yeah.
I will work above and beyond for you if that's how you show up, right?
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So for people who are out there toying with the idea of starting a podcast, do you have any tips, maybe lessons learned or just in general things that you've realized over time with experience? Oh yeah, this is what I'm doing now.
Yeah. So, okay. So first of all, my podcast, I think, according to Listen Notes, is rated like the top 3% in the world. I'm just knocking on the door of like 100,000 downloads in 3+ years. So it's not like Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman or Huberman podcast, right? I'm not in those realms. But it
But
is interesting.
people are suspicious of Lex Friedman because he kind of just came out of nowhere. Well, Joe Rogan, and you understand what happened. It was still surprising, but
Joe Rogan created
yeah.
Lex. But what's interesting is, okay, so 100,000 downloads. Well, how does that get to top 3% in the world? I mean, that's kind of interesting. I mean, it's so the first, I think, lesson learned, I came across some statistic and I don't remember it correctly, but this is the spirit of it, is that the vast majority of podcasts that were started never got past 50 episodes and haven't released an episode in the last 6 months. So there's a stick-to-itiveness with this game. There's a stick-to-itiveness and a longevity and kind of a consistency. And so that's kind of number one. Number two is, for me, the technology and all of those elements are fine, but who is the audience and what is the purpose? And I had to think really hard and long of, okay, who is my audience? What is the niche that I'm going after? And can I really become kind of the podcast of choice in that niche? And so really, in my case, it's a lot of academics, it's a lot of educators, and then their students who are in their classes. And it's a lot of individuals who are in training and development, who are trying to develop leaders. So that's good, and that's been awesome. And I'm now actively working to recruit C-level executives. And can I get CEOs and get them on the podcast and get their perspective? So we kind of have both sides of the house, so to speak, the research and the practice. So I think having a clear understanding of who the audience is that you're going after and what's that space that's ripe, I think is really, really important. And then, another piece of advice I would have is, what's the format that you're going to kind of build? Is it Lex where you're going 3.5 hours? And I was watching one with him and Huberman today. It's kind of playing in the background as I was piddling away on some tasks. But is it something that you're going to edit and spend a lot of time editing? I am audio only, and I edit each episode. I want listeners to have a good experience. So I've chosen not to do video, but that's limiting because now I can't put it up on YouTube. And so there's all these little nooks and crannies and considerations. How have you found it? Have you enjoyed the process? What do you think?
Yeah, I have. And I have had several podcasts in different contexts, being an economist or certain posts over the years. So yes, it's the first time I did it, I was terrified. And I had a co-host on the first one I did, and I was worried, like I say, we're going to run out of stuff to say or nobody listens to us. But then once you get going, yeah, like you say, you sort of hit your stride. It's sort of like, I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld, but if you go watch like the first season of Seinfeld, it doesn't feel right. Like they haven't hit their groove. You know what I mean? Like it's the basic, the characters are the same and everything, but they haven't really hit their stride. And then it's only later that, oh yeah, this is classic Seinfeld. So there was that period with a few of the podcasts where in the beginning, especially if I have a co-host, like it takes us a little bit to get it going. But yes, to answer your question, that has happened, and you're right. I think with me, I may have used this analogy on here before, I can't remember, but it's sort of what was an epiphany was I would watch other podcasts and like say, oh yeah, they do that, and I don't do that. But then I realized like it would have been a shame if James Taylor, the musician, was watching like heavy metal bands and said, oh, I should try to be, you know what I mean? Like, no, you need to be James Taylor. Right. You're going to be a few people's favorite musician, and then you just got to be you. And so that's kind of.
Well, that's another thing, right? I mean, I had a friend that I had not spoken with in a long time reach out via email, and he had been listening to the podcast, and so he was kind of saying that he was enjoying it and such, and he said, you just do a great job of creating a lighthearted, kind of fun-loving tone. And that's what I want. That's what I want to be. And I want to be curious. I want to be engaged. I want to have cool conversations with wonderful people, and I want to have fun, right? And so as long as I'm having fun, and as long as I'm learning, and as long as I think some other folks it's resonating with others, it's been one of the most beneficial, if not kind of the most beneficial career-oriented task I've taken on. Because it's also in some ways provided me with a space or an outlet to contribute to the larger community of academics and scholars. So that's been fun too.
Yeah, what's interesting is how you can, if I want to go learn about some like dark energy or whatever,
yes,
and you can go, and if you find an expert who's on somebody's podcast, usually that's like a good way to dip your toe in before going and reading a journal article or, oh gee, I don't know
100%.
that branch of math. So
well, I listened to a 3.5 conversation with Lex Friedman, and he had a gentleman on who was at Caltech, and he was an expert in Planet 9. Do you know Planet 9 for any reason?
No, but it sounds like if I had 3.5 hours, I can go find out about it.
So theoretically, I think it was Uranus that, was not discovered by astronomers. It was discovered by mathematicians who basically said, look, according to where things are positioned, there should be something here.
Right.
And so there's that kind of theory that there's a 9th planet on this really, really, really big kind of orbit that we can't see, but it's there because how everything's shaped, there should be something else out there. So this is an expert in that. And you're right. I can go there. I can learn about that as a thing. Had no concept that was something. And whether it's evolution, whether it's anthropology, it's a lot of fun. I've loved the medium from a learning standpoint, my own learning as well. I love the medium because I can go on a walk, I can be in the car, and I can learn while I'm no longer just listening to Motley Crue or whatever else in the car. I'm learning.
James Taylor.
James Taylor.
What I was surprised by was that I had assumed there was like a certain hierarchy and there'd be certain guests that, oh no, me being a nobody, I can't get that person. And then what gave me confidence, I would see other people that I'd never heard of that didn't have huge shows were landing like Noam Chomsky. And so certain people that are world famous are perfectly willing to do, some kid's podcast where you can see the kid's bed in the background, and it's amazing. So
I have had a couple of rejections in the last few days, which, sting.
Do you want to talk about it?
It's too bad because I'm like, for real, you won't even get back to me after my third email or you got back to me, but you don't have a half hour. And I get it. And you're right. I mean, some really, really fun individuals that I never necessarily thought I would land have said, sure, yeah. So my family used to vacation in Michigan, and on Lake Michigan, they have these boats. And there's these boats that I was walking by them for the first time when we were there for the first time in Grand Haven. And they have these big tubes coming out. There's like dozens of them. And I'm like, what are these tubes? Well, you put fishing rods in those tubes and you have, 30 lines in the water. And I think it's kind of like that. Do I have 30 lines in the water and 2 or 3 folks that I didn't necessarily think I could land are going to say, sure.
I didn't know. I thought you were going to say, and so the guy who invented that, I had him on the show the other week. Turns out he didn't even think to patent it.
Metaphor.
Yeah.
But, ask a ton of people. There's a lot of them out there. And yeah, you'll get some folks who will say, sure, I'll come on. And I have a list of some of those names right now that I'm about to start to go out and see if I can land some of those fish, right?
Yeah. My regret is, do you know Daniel Ellsberg?
I don't.
The Pentagon Papers, he leaked. Geez, was the Washington Post? No, it was before I was born, right?
Okay.
The stuff, the Vietnam, and they were going to put him in jail, showing what the U.S. government was doing with Vietnam, like the premier whistleblower of all time.
Okay.
And so but he was also a professional economist that had to work in game theory. And there's this thing called the Ellsberg Paradox. I was trying to get him on a different podcast that I host where I have a lot of economists on. But it was COVID hit and his handler was saying, oh yeah, and then he died. He had the nerve to move on before he did my show. So I was kind of disappointed about that. But
game theory, that's a whole fun nook and cranny that you can go down a rabbit hole in.
Yeah, because that was area at
Was it?
NYU, my
Oh,
field. So that's why like I wanted to geek out with him. That was what I was trying to tell the handler, like, I'm not just going to ask him about the war stuff, and I'm going to ask him about, his contributions to game theory, because I figured
yeah.
that probably is rare that the both of those come up at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, in the limit, I think you guys have a few more minutes here, Scott. I did want to ask you, so we at Infineo are really big on using technology to help improve finance. And so I know that you have been involved with using AI as part of what you do. So can you talk a little bit about that enterprise?
Yeah, for sure. And right now, that's just out of the gates, it's paused, right? So this story is maybe more about a failure than it is a success. But for probably about 7 years now, I've been very, very interested in technologies enabling disruption. So I have a course that I teach every spring where I am not the expert, but I bring the experts from Goodyear, the Cleveland Clinic, any number of different organizations into the classroom, Tesla, Apple, and they help the students understand these different kind of technologies enabling disruption. So one week we're talking about Internet of Things, then we might talk about blockchain, then we might talk about AI or different levels of AI. And so I've become enamored with this. And I had a friend in town who was doing a session on Internet of Things. And I said, hey, do you think we could automate presentations? I have, in the context of this discussion right now, we could put it through rev.ai and I could kind of highlight the number of times I've said, we could analyze the percentage of time I've looked into the eye of the camera or been looking elsewhere. We could kind of analyze the tone of my voice, the words that I've used that communicate enthusiasm, excitement, energy, my pace of speaking. We could hand gestures. We could talk about all of that stuff and use AI as a way to provide feedback. So that's really what we were exploring. Can we use technology to coach? In this case, it was students to start with and help them improve their presentation skills. So it was fascinating. It was a lot of fun, and it works because really all we were doing is creating a practice field for people to practice their presentations. So I would say to students, we created this, it was basically a beta, and it worked. It worked beautifully.
What was it you would record them and then run it through the video? Like they were talking to a laptop camera or?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So yeah, open up a Zoom, record the presentation, upload that file to this service or to this platform.
Right, I gotcha.
And then the platform will analyze several different dimensions of the presentation. We were not at video yet, but that's another obviously thing that we can be using AI. Again, the eye contact example with the eye of the camera. So it was awesome. And a student would give a 5-minute presentation and learn very quickly that they used or like 37 times in 5 minutes. So we create this practice field for them to get that down to 0 or very, very few. So using technology to help improve presentation skills. Probably who's doing it best right now is a platform called Yoodli.ai, YOODLI.ai. And Varun and his team have secured funding from Paul Allen and kind of that realm, and just been very, very, very successful. And again, how do we leverage technology to, in the case of, for me as a professor, it actually saved me a lot of time because I knew I was watching their 6th or 7th presentation. I wasn't watching their first. And it created a practice field for them to get feedback. And so at times also I would say, look, once you're down to 2 space fillers per minute, you're speaking at this pace, and you've met these benchmarks, then I'll watch it live. And it was great. It was awesome. So I'm constantly thinking about that. My son's a baseball player and he just came home the other night. They now have this little knob on the end of the bat that will give you all kinds of analytics on your swing. So some people have said that AI is the new electricity. Anything that can be electrified was electrified.
Right.
Everything that can. I just got have you seen the Sleep 8? Have you seen this?
No.
It's a thing you put over your bed, and it will heat and cool your bed depending on the time of night it is, and it provides you analytics on how you slept. Again, who would have thought, right? And then, of course, they've monetized it.
Tell me I didn't sleep very well. I know that already.
My score last night was not very good. They give you a sleep score.
Yeah.
And again,
was it because those podcasts weren't getting back to you, those guests?
I couldn't sleep. I was feeling rejected.
Yeah.
But no, it's so, I just love the conversation around how technology is transforming our lives, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the scary, quite frankly, in some cases. But most importantly, are our students walking into the world eyes wide open so that they can orient their careers. If you're putting a frontline accountant into the world right now, do they know Alteryx? And are they using and leveraging technology to be successful? And so that was our foray. And
Did you put it on pause just because the competition just surpassed you and you realized those guys are doing it better? Or
so that, I think another reason was, do I want to be in business development? Do I want to be spending my time that way, given everything else I had going on? We'd started this during the pandemic. We had a ton of time on our hands. And everything opened back up. And all of a sudden now it's kind of competing with all of the other priorities and opportunities. And so really that's what it came down to. Do we value spending our time this way right now? And kind of ultimately, I didn't value that. But yes, definitely. But there was some really cool, because we were struggling to figure out the business model as well. The go-to-market strategy was a really interesting puzzle. I don't know that we ever totally figured out. I think we had a pretty good plan, but it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of money to make that happen. And ultimately, it came down to, do we value spending our time this way? Ultimately, I think, you have the term the fog of war.
Right.
I think there's also kind of the fog of the idea. Like the idea fueled us for 8 months, and then the reality of what that was going to take interfacing with the world, right? There's a lot there. And that was a huge lesson for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I like your willingness to admit that it didn't quite work. But that's actually it's better that you were saying, you went to do it, and then you realized for us to really compete, and you saw others doing it. So you knew it was a good idea. It was just, I don't want to put, it's sort of like, I had a couple of ideas in grad school, and then I would go to write it up, and my one advisor said, no, nobody cares about that. And I thought, yes, they do. And so I wrote the paper and submitted it to a journal, and they said, oh, so-and-so had a more general result 2 years ago. And so on the one hand, I was disappointed that it was rejected, but I knew it was a good idea. And this so-and-so 2 years ago did it better. So my advisor was wrong. This was a good idea. So
yeah. And just do I value, it would come to kind of working on those tasks, and my energy wasn't there. And so I paid really close attention to that. Like, is this how I want to spend my time? Or is this kind of pushing rocks up hills? I don't necessarily want to be in business development, and I don't want to exist in a sales cycle in higher education that is multi-year. And that's not how I want to spend my time. And that was a little bit of a expensive lesson, but an important lesson, right?
I guess the last question I have for you, Scott, here is, and maybe you don't have the frame of reference, but I know how it's just become a huge deal in the United States to have, mentors and coaches, and even people who are multimillionaires. They go to these seminars and pay ludicrous sums of money for some guy walking around with that, Britney Spears headset or whatever.
You're talking about Tony Robbins.
Or people that he may have inspired a bunch of copycats, and they would probably say, oh, I'm not a copycat. What I do is da-da-da-da. And because we're going to 10x your business. You know what I mean? So no matter what level you are, just, oh no, how do I take it to the next level? Because I want to not just have my private jet, I want to have my own island. How do I do that? Right. And so is that all over the world, or is that like a US thing?
The industrial complex around training and development is massive. I'm a part of that as someone who does that with my own work. So I admittedly kind of own that. But yes,
I'm not making fun of it. I'm just asking.
No, that's, I think, you can go to places like Peter Diamandis. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter. His work with Singularity University, where he's constantly talking about 10xing your business.
Right.
And so Tony Robbins does that work. So no, I think there's a huge kind of, again, I called it like this industrial complex around that. Right. And I am cautious of it, right? Cautious, and that just people go in eyes wide open, that very few silver bullets exist, that, this is going to be the key and the silver bullet to 10x your business. Now, any learning experience, I think, is a great thing. And maybe there's some mindsets and ways of thinking about the work but it's probably a part of your journey versus the solution.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for that. Fair enough. But I'm wondering though, is that a specifically U.S. centric thing? Because it seems very American, Wall Street, rah, rah, greed is good, Gordon Gekko. But is that fad taking over in France and Germany or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That exists in Europe. There are consultancies and there are firms that are very much having that conversation all around the world. I guess I shouldn't say that. I'm less familiar with Asia, but yeah, that does exist in Europe as well.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you, Scott, for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation, and good luck with all of your endeavors to raise the next generation of leaders.
Bob, thank you. You know what it feels like when you're in the presence of a great leader? You talked about that. And we know what it feels like when you're in the presence of someone who isn't maybe doing that work well. And so how do we create more of the former than the latter? So thank you so much for having me.
I thought you were going to tell me which one I was. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Scott, for your time. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Be well.
This concludes another episode of the Founders Forum. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the hosts and for previous episodes, visit foundersforum.io. Thanks for listening.